A few days later, we were back in the familiar, comfortable chaos of our lodgings at 221B Baker Street. The memory of Blackwood Manor, with its dark secrets and its atmosphere of palpable dread, seemed like a half-remembered nightmare. The rhythmic clatter of horse-drawn carriages on the street below, the shrill cries of the newsboys, the familiar smoky scent of a London fog. It was all a welcome antidote to the chilling silence and the cloying perfume of the Sussex countryside. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting a warm amber glow on the dusty volumes and the chemical apparatus that littered the room. Holmes, in his familiar mouse-colored dressing gown, sat in his armchair, a thin spiral of blue smoke rising from the pipe that was clenched between his teeth. He was, once more, the familiar, enigmatic figure I knew so well. The brilliant bohemian detective who was both my friend and my constant source of intellectual astonishment. For a long time, we sat in a comfortable silence, the silence of two men who have shared a great and terrible adventure and have emerged once more into the light. But I knew that the case was not yet truly over, not for me. There were still a few small pieces of the puzzle that did not quite fit, a few questions that remained unanswered. "An extraordinary case, Holmes," I said, finally breaking the silence. "Truly extraordinary. The sheer diabolical cunning of it all. It is almost beyond belief." Holmes took the pipe from his mouth and smiled, a thin, enigmatic smile. "The capacity of the human heart for evil, my dear Watson," he said, his voice a low, reflective murmur, "is a subject of endless fascination. And in the case of Miss Eleanor Vance, we have seen that capacity in its purest, most concentrated form." "Her performance was magnificent," I said. "The fragile, grief-stricken orphan. She played the part to perfection. I confess, even I was completely taken in." "Indeed," Holmes said, "she was a true artist of deception. But every artist, no matter how brilliant, has their own unique style, their own characteristic brushstrokes. And it was these small, stylistic flourishes that ultimately led to her downfall." He leaned back on his chair, his eyes half closed. His mind, I knew, replaying the entire complex symphony of the case. "You asked me, Watson," he said, "how I knew. How I was able to see the truth when everyone else was blinded by the fog of lies and superstition. The answer, as always, lies in the details. The small, seemingly insignificant facts that, when properly arranged, reveal the larger hidden pattern." He began his explanation, his voice a low, steady monologue, a verbal dissection of the case from its very beginning. "The first clue," he said, "was the letter itself. The expensive paper, the trembling hand, the cryptic message. It all pointed to a person of wealth and education who was in a state of extreme distress. But it was the wax seal that first aroused my suspicions. The crest, a bird of prey, clutching a flower, was a clear, if somewhat melodramatic, symbol of the Harrington family's dark secret. It was a visual representation of the predatory nature of their legacy, of the beautiful yet deadly flower that was the source of their power. He continued, his voice a low, hypnotic hum. Then, there was the matter of the two murders. Finch, the man of science, was killed in a way that was both scientific and symbolic. He was struck down in his own temple, the greenhouse, by the very subject of his research. Lord Harrington, the man of superstition and fear, was killed in a way that played upon his own deep-seated anxieties. A poisoned medicine, a staged death, a crime designed to look like the fulfillment of a family curse. The killer, I realized, was not just a murderer. They were a storyteller, a dramatist, a person who took a perverse, artistic pleasure in the staging of their crimes. He paused and looked at me, a thin smile playing on his lips. And this, my dear Watson, is where you played such a crucial role. Your observations of the human element, of the emotional dynamics of the house, were invaluable. You gave me the psychological context, the web of relationships and motives in which the crimes were committed. You told me of Lady Harrington's coldness, of Lord Harrington's fear, of Miss Vance's grief. You painted a picture of a house in turmoil, a family on the brink of collapse. He leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with a renewed intensity. But it was the small physical clues that provided the irrefutable proof. The mud on Lady Harrington's dress, which proved that her alibi was a lie, and the cufflink, the silver serpent eating its own tail. That, my dear Watson, was the key to the entire affair. The cufflink? I asked, bewildered. But I thought you said the serpent was Eleanor. Indeed, he said. But the cufflink itself was a clue of a different sort. It was a man's cufflink, and a very distinctive one at that. I knew that if I could identify its owner, I would have a direct link to the killer. And so, upon our return to London, I made a few discreet inquiries among the city's more exclusive jewelers, and I discovered that the cufflink was one of a pair, custom-made for a certain gentleman of fashion, a man known for his expensive tastes and his somewhat dubious connections. He paused, allowing the suspense to build. The cufflink, he said, his voice dropping to a low, dramatic whisper, belonged to Alistair Finch. I stared at him, dumbfounded. Finch? I stammered. But he was the victim. Precisely, Holmes said, a triumphant gleam in his eye. And that is the final, brilliant, and utterly diabolical twist in this extraordinary case. Eleanor Vance did not drop that cufflink by accident. She planted it. It was a deliberate act of misdirection, a false clue designed to throw us off the scent, to point the finger of suspicion at a non-existent accomplice. It was an act of supreme arrogance, of breathtaking intellectual audacity. And it was her final, fatal mistake. He explained that Eleanor had likely stolen the cufflink from Finch's room sometime before the murder. She had planted it at the scene of the crime, knowing that it would be found, and that it would create a mystery, a puzzle, that would distract from the true, simple nature of her crime. She overplayed her hand, Watson, he said. She was too clever, too theatrical. She could not resist the temptation to add one final artistic flourish to her masterpiece of murder. And in doing so, she revealed her true nature. She revealed herself to be not just a killer, but a performer, a manipulator, a person who saw this entire tragic affair as a game, a battle of wits. And that, my dear Watson, is a game that I very rarely lose. He leaned back in his chair, a look of quiet satisfaction on his face. The entire complex web of the case had been untangled, the final hidden secrets revealed. And what of the others? I asked. What became of Lady Harrington? She has retired to a small cottage on the coast, Holmes said. She has sold the manor and its contents. The secret of the crimson bloom, I am told, has been destroyed. The greenhouse has been dismantled, and the flowers have been burned. The curse of Blackwood Manor is, at long last, at an end. I was silent for a moment, my mind grappling with the sheer intellectual brilliance of the man who sat before me. He had taken a case that was a fog of lies and superstition, and he had, with the pure, cold light of reason, illuminated its every dark corner. "Holmes," I said, my voice filled with a profound and heartfelt admiration, "you are a true genius, a poet of logic. I do not know what the world would do without you." He smiled, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually severe features. "The world, my dear Watson," he said, "has a remarkable capacity for muddling through, with or without the likes of me. But I confess, it is the work itself that I find so stimulating. The thrill of the chase, the intellectual challenge of the puzzle. It is the only thing that saves me from the dreary, soul-destroying ennui of everyday life." He offered a brief, philosophical reflection on the nature of crime. "It is a fascinating paradox, is it not?" he mused, "that the same human intellect that can produce works of great art and beauty can also be twisted to create schemes of such monstrous evil. The line between genius and madness, between creativity and destruction, is a thin one indeed." He rose and walked to his desk, where he kept a series of meticulously organized files, a record of his many strange and wonderful cases. He took out a new file, and with a neat, precise hand, wrote the words, "The Case of the Crimson Bloom," on the label. He then carefully placed his notes, the decoded text from the ledger, and the small silver cufflink inside, and filed it away. The case was over. The story was told. And as he closed the drawer, he turned to me, a familiar, restless fire already beginning to burn in his eyes. "Well, Watson," he said, a hint of his old, familiar ennui creeping back into his voice, "the affair of the Crimson Bloom is concluded. A most satisfactory little problem. And now, what is next?" He picked up the day's newspaper from the mantelpiece, his eyes scanning the columns for some new, strange, and wonderful tale of human folly and wickedness. The game was over, but the great, endless, and fascinating game of life, with its infinite capacity for mystery and surprise, was always and forever afoot, and I, for one, was profoundly grateful to be a part of it, at his side.